And welcome to the latest episode of The Property Cast, powered by Total Property. And in this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about, should landlords be worried about the new Labour government? And of course, we're recording this on the Monday after the general election, when it has been confirmed that the Labour Party won a landslide victory. So this is all hot off the press. And of course, I'm joined by Paul Champlina, founder of Landlord Action and Chief Commercial Officer of HFIS. Paul, welcome.
Welcome, thank you.
Good. And of course, Sean Hooker as our special guest. Now, Sean is the head of redress for the Property Redress Scheme, which is one of the two government redress schemes that property agents in England must join. Sean has worked for the HFIS group for 17 years, originally helping set up the resolution service for the My Deposits Tenancy Deposit Protection Scheme, and then moving to set up the Property Redress Scheme. Sean runs a team of professional dispute resolution experts and is a trained mediator and adjudicator, and also takes an active interest in politics and meets regularly with the government. So Sean, welcome again.
Yes, thank you, Ed. Yeah, that's a lovely resume. 17 years.
17 years.
Yeah,
that's
so actually
a long time.
Actually, when I joined, that was the last time there was a Labour government.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
So been through the whole of the last 14 years and seen every element of all the, was it 15 odd
housing ministers. Well, look, we're going to talk about a lot of those things now. So why don't we just dive in, and I'll open with the first question, and then can you talk us through the timeline, Sean, of what the new government will need to do in the first few weeks? I think the King's speech is slated for the 17th of July. So what happens between the general election and now what happens between over the next, well, he's talking 100 days, Keir Starmer, isn't he? So
yeah, 100
what
days.
Happens now?
Okay, so look, we had the general election. The announcement was on the Friday, and immediately and unusually, Keir Starmer met with his cabinet on the Saturday to introduce them all to the public. Pretty much very similar names to the ones that were the spokespeople before the general election, so there was no real surprises. So in terms of housing, we've got overall on the Department of Levelling Up, whether it retains that name or not, we'll see. But that's Angela Rayner,
yes. And
also they announced the junior ministers, which was
and she's the Deputy Prime Minister.
She's a Deputy Prime Minister as well. So that's pretty much in tradition of what we've had in the past, because if you remember, the levelling up department and that sort of thing all evolved from the office of the Deputy Prime Minister. So it's pretty much that area is seen as a very key area to the Labour administration. And of course, we got Matthew Pennycook, I'm afraid, who is now the spokesperson. He was the spokesperson. He's now the minister who's going to deliver on the private rented sector. So look, day one, they will meet. They will have, that would have been a big statement. We're starting work. We're rolling up our sleeves from day one. And of course, Parliament opens again tomorrow. We're on the Monday. So by the time you hear that, they would have opened on the Tuesday. And basically what happens then is they elect a speaker, and then all the MPs are formally sworn in. So not a lot goes on in that particular week until we get to the King's speech, which is when the programme for government will be announced. So the things that Labour want to prioritise will be in that.
But they will have, of course, they'd have done, the commentators I've been listening to, a lot of the hard work, a lot of the planning has already been done. Because Labour obviously had a big assumption that they would be the next government.
Yeah, so I would. What would have happened whilst Parliament was prorogued? I mean, the civil servants would have still been turning up to work. They wouldn't be able to undertake a lot of work on a legislative programme. They didn't know what was going to be in place, but they would have been doing some assumptions and preparations. What happens if X? What happens if Y? So hopefully they are geared up for when Minister Rayner and Matthew Pennycock go into the office today, actually, on Monday, they will start to say, well, actually, what do you want to do? Are you going to take the bills that we've already got on the table? How are you going to, what do you want us to do with that? What direction of travel do you want to do?
So in short, not a lot is going to particularly happen, in your view, over the next month or so?
Well, look, the day after the King's speech, it's when the government put together their business.
Right.
So we'll know, at least on a week-by-week basis, what the government intends to do in any particular week. And they could actually announce quite a lot of work in advance. Now, we've got to remember that traditionally, MPs go into summer recess.
Yeah, it's going to be a very short recess.
So, yes, so it's going to be a shortened one. So Keir Starmer's talking about cutting that down to the minimum holiday. So, yeah, if you're an MP, a newly MP, I wouldn't be booking a long trip to wherever you're going.
So, what are the key decisions that they will now need to make? So, this week they're going to be talking about planning and putting some ideas. Obviously, this massive house building programme, which, to be fair, Paul, every government promises and has always promised, even going right the way back to the 90s and when Labour were in last, and successive governments have absolutely failed, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got the Renters Reform Bill. I think before that is the planning. The planning is a priority because, of course, the house building. We haven't seen any detail. We have to wait for the detail.
150,000.
Yeah, they said 1.5 million in 5 years. But we hear the same old story all the time. I mean, obviously, we have. I think the emphasis is about affordability, is about the social housing, is about housing associations, is about building, is about planning. They haven't got enough planning officers. It needs a total reform. I mean, I think the last two governments have talked about planning reforms. It's never actually happened. So I know it'd be that is going to be high on the agenda. What do you think?
I totally agree. What you have to remember with planning is a legal framework.
Correct.
It's not something that you can just on a whim or
massive job
change. It is a massive job to change the law regarding to planning. Because each of the local authorities that actually enforce it are acting in a quasi-judicial role. So they are acting and looking at all the evidence on each one of the planning applications that come before them against the criteria, a legal framework criteria, and they have to apply that as a judge would apply the law in a court.
And I think the biggest frustrations I hear when I speak to developers when I'm out on the ground is depending on where that development is, you're stuck with whatever that council and that local authority is. And again, it all comes down to resourcing, local authorities, civil servants, all that type of stuff. I mean, how they're going to change that, I don't know.
Well, that's the point. Well, but there was a lot of work that was actually done prior to, to the end of the Conservative government. Go's department did actually do quite a lot of work on putting through the principles for a framework for future housing developments, and it included things like aesthetics and suitability and resources, pretty much kind of like saying actually every one of the local authorities that need to do a local plan have to abide by these principles.
And on that point, they've made it very clear they want to build new towns. And that is a bill high.
Yeah, but let's just push this a little bit further. I know, Sean, you're not sitting in the cabinet. Why is planning so important, and what is the impact planning's going to have on the private rented sector? Because of course, when governments talk about building houses, generally they're talking about building houses for occupiers or getting more of the younger generation onto the housing ladder. Is that going to, if they sort this planning out and they build these 300,000 houses every year, is that not going to have a negative impact on the private rented sector? Just talk me through.
Well, it's both an opportunity and a threat. It's as usual. So in certain areas, by having a progressive plan for increasing the number of dwellings within a town, you've got opportunity, because you know that you're evidently going to try and build the houses where you've got the highest demand. So by freeing up some of the planning laws, you will actually make it easier to get properties through. Now, one of the problems you've got with the private rented sector is its strength and its weakness. It's a collective of individuals. It's not, you know,
it's not corporate money, so to speak.
Yeah, there are corporate. Of course, there are corporates entering into the private rented sector, but mostly it's the small landlord making individual decisions for what they want to do with the investment properties that they've got. I mean, what you have to remember is that governments build very few houses themselves.
Yeah,
right.
You know, we haven't had an era of when the government has dipped into the public purse to mass build properties for generations now. Now, some councils have some capital investment programs and are building them, their own houses. But mostly you are relying on the private sector, the developers, to actually build and do the heavy lifting.
And they can earn more money.
Yes, of course.
In the private sector. I mean, like last year, I think there was something like 39,000 affordable properties that were built. It wasn't just with regard to shared ownership, but it was also with regard to renting.
Yeah, 100%.
It's still not enough.
No, it's still not.
So big challenges. So okay. So what about let's talk about what everyone was talking about prior to the last 2 to 3 years: the abolishment of Section 21, the no fault evictions, the so-called retaliatory eviction. Now, Labour have come out and said that they're going to immediately ban or abolish Section 21. Now, that was in the original Renters Reform Bill, which I understand it was a cross-party bill, so there was a lot of support from all parties in the House of Commons, and of course that was then rowed back slightly as they then started to talk about, well, they need to sort out the court process and the courts before they introduce that. Now, Labour have come out and said, use the word immediately.
Right.
What does that actually, can they abolish Section 21, whether it's a good or bad thing, that's not for us to debate, but can they actually abolish it within the first 100 days of Keir Starmer's reign?
Well, they could definitely abolish it within the first 100 days in terms of getting the legislation across the board to do that. Across the renters reform. Well, it doesn't have to be even the Renters Reform Bill, but we suspect it will be part of a Renters Reform Bill, but you don't necessarily need you could actually put a separate bill specifically banning Section 21. I don't think they're going to do that, because I do believe that they bought into the idea that this is a package and not just a single action. Yeah. But there will still be the process of going through with Parliament, and they could get that through relatively quickly because they've got a big majority, until they get to the House of Lords, when they don't necessarily have a majority there. They'll need the support of crossbenchers, Liberal Democrats, Greens, whoever is in that Parliament, that in that part of the Parliament that could help get it over the line. So they could get the legislation done relatively quickly, maybe even as soon as the autumn, but then you're going to have to look at the implementation period, because you have a lot of tenancies that are still ongoing, and just like whenever you amend any of this stuff, there has to be a kind of a transition period. So maybe even if you say from when the Royal Assent happens that you cannot issue a tenancy agreement that contains a Section 21 clause in it, because there won't be a Section 21, there will still be a lot of tenancies that will be going through the process of running off for quite a while after that. So yes, it is possible.
So it's
not day one.
Is this a headline? Because of course, one part of the issue, which Paul, you were talking a lot about, and I know Ben Beadle from the National Residential Landlords Association was talking about, was as part of the package of the abolishment of Section 21, we were looking at the strengthening of Section 8, which is the other option landlords have, but only under a set of certain circumstances. So is this a soundbite? Is this a headline? We're going to abolish Section 21, but there's so many other things that need to go round it.
I think it was so high profile both before and during the election. Although I have to say, on housing generally, the whole election campaign was very underwhelming, wasn't it?
It was very little.
It was very little. Cards were not kind of revealed. There was a few sound bites that came out. I would say because it's it's become like like a mantra, especially for the campaigning organisations from the tenant side. I think that Labour have no option but to deliver on that promise as one of their top priorities. So the process will start. Now the reality is that up until the last minute cold feet that the government got, because there were 49 rebels that were making a big protest against parts of the bill. The intention for the government was to get it over the line before the end of the year. Gove had actually extended the bill's passage to include this, the autumn period and into the new year to get it over the line. So even if Labour was slightly quicker than that timetable, we are still on that timetable, and we will still have that 18 months, I think, of it running off. What would be different will be that from day one, if you take a tenant in on day one of the legislation, you will not be able to use a Section 21 because it won't exist, and if you evict them the next day, try and evict them the next day, you would have to go through a Section 8 process. But most of the landlords will not just be issuing a tenancy and then immediately want to get rid of the tenant.
No.
So there will be, even if you kind of like book a tenant in on the day after the legislation, you're hoping they're going to be there for at least 6 months, if not a bit longer, before you even have to worry about an eviction.
So in your opinion, Sean, and you articulately explained it all to us, do you think, and it's all guesstimate because we've been guessing the last 5 years, reality-wise, do you think round about now we could be looking at 18 months? To 18 months for that transition, that change, for
transition.
A total transition, Renters Reform Mark 2 to come in with the amendments, and we'll touch on some of those amendments. Is that your opinion?
I would say to get the whole process, and 18 months from now we'll be totally in the new regime.
Yeah. Okay.
So I mean, bless the lawyers that don't do this on a daily basis. I think when you employ a lawyer to do an eviction, they're going to actually have to look and say, well, exactly when was that tenancy signed? What state is it in? And that sort of stuff there. So
more information, I think. But your view is that will be it will happen pretty quickly.
Yes,
or at least the announcement.
Yeah, and I think by having that, you will also to partly alleviate the fact that the courts need to be strengthened up.
Yeah,
because if you from day one it suddenly all went to the end of the Section 21 and every single tenancy, you can imagine that the whole system would blow up. Well, Paul, you tell me, you deal with it on a daily basis. If they suddenly that was the only option without a transition.
Of course. Yeah. So the other big question, and I actually quite liked your comment there, Sean, that the campaign, the election campaign was pretty underwhelming when it came to housing from all the parties, to be fair, not just Labour. But other than Section 21, which was a headline, the other concern, I suppose, and I think in the debates and in all the rhetoric around this, rent control was never actually answered by anyone. So many landlords do fear this. This is something that they do worry about, which is rent control. Now, they had that in Scotland, didn't particularly work, and I think the last I understood, and you can correct me, is that there may be a devolution of power down to the local council to make their own decisions. But whilst there was nothing much in the manifesto about this, what's your gut feel for what the Labour Party will do with rent controls, or will they just leave that alone and look at the quick wins like Section 21 and maybe raising standards and that sort of thing?
I think they will put the rhetoric in to say that they are trying to look at affordability of rentals, but they won't put anything in. Now, if they pass a further devolution, which they promised to do, and actually all the major parties promise more devolution, there's two reasons for that. One, I think decisions made locally are more robust and are more accountable. But two, as a government, the more you can push down the to the lower levels, the less blame you're going to get for when it goes wrong. Yeah. So I don't think they want to have a national rent controls, but they may devolve the powers to some of the regional mayors and authorities. Now, at the moment, housing or the main part of housing is not at that level.
No.
So therefore, would it go down to even lower local level? And then what resources are there for them to actually have in any place some form of policing it or scale or whatever? Now, interestingly, there was a survey that has been recently done which actually shows that landlords are not as afraid of rent controls as we did think, especially when you put to them that it would mean putting into your tenancy agreement a annual review where the rent can be upped by up to the rate of inflation as determined by whatever rate that is chosen to measure your inflation rate. So that actually, instead of it becoming a rent control in the sense that...
It's a rent review.
It's a rent review. It's something where the landlord actually has to review the rent on an annual basis, decide whether to put it up or not, and if you're putting it up, put it up by the rate of inflation rather than whatever arbitrary figure that they want to make up.
Because quite naively on this, and this is a very naive statement, but again, I do get asked this quite a lot actually, so I'm going to put it out there, is that there's no mortgage control. So if you're an owner-occupier and the Bank of England put or the building society or bank put their mortgage rate up, there's no one turning round and saying, oh, that's become unaffordable, which of course mortgage rates are very unaffordable for a very large part of the population, especially as they come off their old fixed rates. Why does the private rented sector feel that they have to put, well, not the private rented, but why does the government feel they have to put in a rent control when you don't have that in the owner-occupier?
Right, I think there's two things there before Paul comes in. Number one, the mortgage market is far more competitive at the moment than
and regulated.
Unregulated is number two.
Yeah.
So number one, it's far more competitive. And what we have at the moment, because of the supply issue, we have a lack of choice for the consumer, and it's not regulated. And the CML would basically ask some very severe questions if suddenly there was a cartel of mortgage lenders sticking up the rate. They use what they call the swap rates, which I vaguely know about. You've had other experts.
That's another whole podcast.
And that's what dictates what the long-term rates will be for mortgages. There's nothing like that in the private rented sector.
Yeah.
There's no gauge. The only gauge you have got is of what rent should be is if you challenge a rent increase, you go to a tribunal and they have to research.
And Labour want there to be more power, so tenants have more power.
I think there should be more power for that appeal.
But then, of course, you need to have resource in the tribunal.
See, in the commercial market, again, trying to get a challenge against a rent review by a commercial landlord goes on months and months.
Yeah, it's a completely different ballgame. Just on the point with regard to what Sean was saying, I think we have a bit more of a cottage industry, obviously, when it comes to landlord. You've got 2.74 million landlords. All the individual landlords, as far as the government is concerned, they're all making their own rules up. I mean, that's the reality to a certain extent. Responsible landlords. When you talk about the point about landlords, and that article was Leaders Romans, I saw that survey, right, where they turned around and said, actually, the thing that, it's the words rent caps that scares the life out of landlords.
You can't charge more than that.
You can't charge, and everyone goes back to the 70s, and it squashed when it came to investment, and then obviously we had the Housing Act that came in 1988, and then that opened up a whole industry and you had investment with regard to short-term tenancies. The word rent caps need to be taken out of the equation. Because that's the scaremongering. It's actually rent reviews. And when you've got that up to, when it comes to inflation or whatever, bearing in mind we've had a massive spike of landlords that had put rents up because they were forced to put rents up because obviously from September 22 because of the rates with Liz Truss. Previous to that, landlords haven't really been putting rents up. That's historical. Because I speak to landlords on a daily basis. But is there not a danger that they said, I asked a question, I asked a question last week at the Landlord Investment Show, did a talk to 130, 140 landlords, how many have you put your rents up in the last 12 months? There was about 8 hands that went up.
But a concern I have with that type of is that where even a review is where a landlord might say, well, Sean, you're a lovely tenant and you're paying X pound a month, I'm not going to change that because you've always paid. You put in these clauses into these contracts and of course, well, I'm sorry, Sean, I'm going to have to put it up by the minimum of inflation or 5%, whichever is higher.
But don't forget, it's discretionary though.
But people don't look at the word discretionary, do they?
Yeah,
that's where I worry about putting
but then
this
you have
type
the
of control in.
relationships there between landlords and tenants. If you've got a good tenant that's been living in your property for years, you build a rapport up with them, you see that they treat your property really well and it's a home and whatever, and you put it, if it went up, if you think about it, you put up 3-5% or whatever it may be, and it might be affordable, but a lot of landlords where they don't need to put up, they won't put it up. Because don't forget, there's a big cost when it comes to onboarding and advertising, putting a property. And then, of course, when you do find a tenant, then actually before that, I'm going to have to refurb and I'm going to spend $8,000 on my property. Where's that $8,000? There's all those different commercial decisions.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly the message out there that we should be saying. Is that, look, it's actually, people know where they stand. So you'll say what happened from the anecdotal stuff, from talking to friends and what we've seen in the market, is that people were being asked for 20-25% increases in their rents overnight because after Liz Truss, all I have to say, Liz Truss, there was no trust there. After that day, that suddenly the landlord looked and said, I am not making any money. They've already had Section 24, and then suddenly the rates go up, and suddenly those big mortgages, which they, were suddenly, I'm literally making no money. I have to charge more.
Or I have to sell.
Or I have to sell.
We're seeing
so they were going to their tenants and they were saying, sorry, 25% up on your rent, It was as much as that. I mean, I have several friends whose kids live in central London that had that.
But on that point, and I think it comes back to maybe one of your further questions, Ed, then it comes to, and I've been saying this for quite a few, last 2-3 years especially, more so the last 18 months, then there's the affordability issue. So, if you think that the biggest topic of conversations with young voters from 17 to 35 was housing and affordability, so then you look at this government about what are they going to do about affordability. So, you take rent cap, something has to be done.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And I think that's the thing, the affordability. In any healthy market, you set your price at the price where you can maximise your profit, but you are getting the maximum demand. So if you suddenly put your prices up and nobody can afford it, then you're literally cutting your nose.
But the problem is you're still getting on average 25 tenant applicants looking for one property.
And that's the point. So at the moment we have a booming market out there for demand, but the supply is short, and so therefore, what market would not take advantage of that?
I want to move on to things that aren't in or were missing from the Labour manifesto. Let's just focus on Labour again. Ignore the also-rans as they turned out to be. One of the key things which I thought might end up in a manifesto was, and you mentioned it earlier, lack of regulation, but the regulation of property agents. Now, the facts are 50, 51, 52% of all lettings are managed by managing agents in one form or another. And that lack of regulation you mentioned otherwise has impacts on health and safety, standards, the green agenda, all of these things. Why did they not put that in there? Or was that just something that is not now going to happen, it's kicked down the line?
Very hard to say, because...
I mean, again, we're crystal balling. I do understand that.
So the Labour manifesto, as it was written more like a story than a traditional manifesto. So a traditional manifesto is a list normally, and you break it down into the sections. But what Labour did was they talked about themes. They talked about the environment. They talked about the economy. They talked about standard of living, and they put that in there to a story of what their vision was, and it was very short on detail. And this is now where we're going to now look. We're in the crystal ball gazing. We're going to look and say, what are Labour going to do? Now, by instinct, they traditionally have favoured regulation over a totally free market, and they have tended to want to have government accountable bodies that actually the government can actually control through legislation and other stuff there. So I would say that we are looking at a government that's probably more in favour of regulation than the previous one, but not to the extent that it is going to over-regulate. And that's for two reasons.
It doesn't want to stifle growth, does it?
It doesn't want to stifle growth. Because
key.
one of the interesting things, now rightly or wrongly, that I was reading, is that every, for the last 30, 40 years, all economic growth spurts have had property at the centre of it. I mean, as we were running down, say, manufacturing and other parts of the industry, so we had property was up there along with the financial services and driving the economy forward. So they definitely will not want to stifle the property market. They'll need to keep that going. But how you can do that in a regulated way where you are going to get affordability, there are going to be some wins and some loses for the industry, and we're going to have to see how that pans out.
But do you think it is something that will be on their agenda to look at?
I would say so. Not least because isn't that something that the industry has been crying out for? And why would why would you not listen to the sector that is most involved with that part of the economy, the ones that actually are the drivers? And they are saying universally that regulation needs to come in because it actually provides the fair playing field, and the market is healthier if you have the regulation in place.
Can I ask a question? With your role as head of Property Redress Scheme, we've got over 19,000 members, haven't we?
Yeah.
We're the biggest redress scheme out there. How would that look like for your members? Because obviously it's about education, accreditation up to a level 4 standard. How does that look like for your members? That maybe the smaller guys.
Okay, for the smaller guys, look. So let's not beat around the bush. Let's call it what it is, because Labour's going to call it what it is. You set up a register. Number one, you set up a register. If you set up the register, then people.
But haven't you already got that as your members?
No, but because what we don't do, because we're not a regulator,
right?
We by law have to accept people in good faith that they're joining a redress scheme to comply with the law. Right. We don't do huge amounts of compliance from day one.
Right.
There is not too many hoops that you have to jump in to join. Now that allows people to be part and comply by the law without it being exclusive. So it's a free market in that sense. And we do our compliance as and when we find out that anything's gone wrong. If you have a register and you've got a tick, you've got client money protection, that you've got indemnity insurance, you've done a certain number of qualifications, you've complied with all the legal requirements that you need, then that becomes your kind of like your badge. That becomes your entry number into all the other compliance products that you need to actually purchase, and that will help with for when an agent wants to get these insurances, there will be a lot less bureaucracy in terms of getting client money protection, because already that information is stored.
And it would be better for the consumer being.
And the consumer could go on and look and say, Nigel Jones, estate agent, 35 years in Cheltenham.
Good luck to him. Well done, Nigel.
But he now complies with all of the
I mean, we are talking. I mean, we're right at the start of this, aren't we? And we're trying to look at what a Labour government might do in 5 or even 10 years down the line. But there was a lot of good foundations being put in, whether they were actually taken forward or not. So there's stuff that the Labour government will obviously pick up and run with. And of course, we'll wait until the King's speech to see if there's any more detail. I think a good step if they do this is to include extending AWAB's law into the private rented sector. I think that, to me, I'd be quite disappointed and shocked if they didn't look at standards within the private rental sector. What do you think?
Again, the original idea was to set up a property portal and that property to meet the minimum standards. it makes no sense that we have a market where you don't know that what you are purchasing is literally safe, and we are talking safe.
Yes,
it's not a difference between disappointment because it doesn't have the right, a bit of Wi-Fi or it's as close to the station as you thought. You want to move into the place where you put your head down every night, knowing that you're going to wake up in the morning. It's, without.
But also, it's giving it's making sure there's accountability. That moving from, I still think that the social housing sector is far worse than the private rental sector when it comes to housing standards. Just from my feedback and from seeing stuff. But when it comes to a complaint, it means the landlord's got to deal with it in a certain amount of time.
100%. And you're entering into business as a landlord. You certainly don't want to go into a business where there's going to be detrimental harm to your customer.
Correct.
So it makes absolute sense. But it must come also with help and support. Anybody that buys property, whether they're buying it for themselves or they're buying it for an investment, probably when you buy your first house or flat, you don't realise all the things you need to do to it to keep it to keep it safe for yourself. Let alone if you're renting it out. And I think what we need to try and do,
it's a serious job being a
landlord. It is. And I think we need to give help and support to landlord investors.
But we need to make sure we go enforcement as well.
We need 100% enforcement, and it'd be easier if you have a register or portal where you can actually the authorities can go and double check you're on that list, because it will be like you only know a black hole is there because you can see the stars, the bright stars around it. You can't see a black hole itself, but you can see a gap. So by making that an intelligence-led situation where you have to register, it becomes far more easy to work out.
What do you think will happen, Sean, last question from me, what do you think will happen with capital gains? That in a way, I suppose, increasing capital gains tax for property owners actually might keep some property owners within the market rather than selling and being hit by increased tax. What do you think?
Well, this is
a big subject.
Yeah, it's a big subject, and it's the government's got to raise money somehow, and I think what the industry now needs is it's had a push me pull me kind of situation at the moment where landlords are being pushed and pulled and don't really know what the right decision for the long term for their investment is. So we have had Section 24 tax issues, which forced or drove a lot of landlords into incorporating, and now we've got a situation where they are now firms, and so therefore they're treated like a firm,
a business,
treated like a business. They could be liable to higher corporation tax. I would say, however, that from what I could delve into and listen to from what the government is saying, and the advice that they've been getting, is that if they're going to grow the economy, they're not going to penalise small businesses. So sorry out there if you own a massive portfolio that turns over multi-million pounds worth of money, you may find that the tax regime might be a little bit more
disadvantageous.
Disadvantageous. But for the small mum and pop landlord, it would be madness for them to actually to hammer them further.
Isn't it?
And that's all small businesses.
Yes, of course.
Isn't it now the time? Bearing in mind, that there's always this fear of our Labour, what they're going to be like with regard to landlords. Is it not now a time of a message where they could actually say, we do need landlords, we want landlords to stay in the industry as long as possible, which gives tenant greater security. Yes, we want you to be more professionalised. And on the back of that, I've always said that, because of course, if there's insecurity, landlords come out the market, then good tenants are asked to leave a property, and then of course they're in an auction war, they're trying to find other properties. Isn't it a way of actually, if you're a landlord and you let your tenants stay in the property as long as possible, I've always said, shouldn't there be some sort of tax advantage or some sort of tax benefit? A taper, like if you let them in for 5-10 years, you actually get that. I actually have always said that.
Yeah.
Don't you think that's a good idea?
I think it's a good idea, and I think in other European countries there is a carrot and stick approach.
I've got that, yeah.
And if you can get the whole holistic situation where you are building the right number of social housing, that you are building the right number of private for sale properties, and the rental market is healthy, and you're supplying that. Why, if you comply with all of those rules, if you're encouraging a landlord to fill that gap, would you not give them an incentive to do that? I'd like to see more of the council schemes brought in, where they are taking and actually providing, getting the private sector to provide some of the social housing needs. I'd like to see some more incentive for small term developments, so that it's not all the big corporate developers. You can build smaller projects that maybe even got together with a cooperative of landlords to try and build a small estate for the rental sector. Those are sort of imaginative ideas, and actually if we can find the right piece of land, why not build a new town? Milton Keynes, was great. It's now one of a booming city. Despite the fact that everybody associates it with the cows, plastic cows.
So coming right the way back to the question, in a nutshell, Paul, Sean, we've got a Labour government with a whacking great majority, probably likely to be in power for the next generation they're talking about, but I would say at least 2 terms. Should landlords be worried about this new Labour government?
I don't think so, and I think if you look at the track record of the last Labour government, that's when we started the property boom, and it's at the moment it's a very, very healthy market for landlords, regardless of the fact that there are challenges. Paul, you will verify for that when you went to that landlord show last week, the National Investment Show. People were battering down the doors to get into into your talks and getting information about entering into the market. So there are new landlords entering every single day into this market. It can't be that bad.
Yeah, I think the government need to send out the right messaging to actually encourage landlords that we want you to be professional. We value when you stand into the industry. I actually just think landlords shouldn't panic. They just watch and wait. There's a lot of rhetoric out there. I think this is a long-term business. I just don't want there to be landlord panic. Just wait for the detail to come
Absolutely.
through. Definitely.
Well, guys, thank you both for joining me on this property podcast. As always with these episodes, the final comment is we need to wait and see. But until we get more information and more detail, which we'll be bringing you hot off the press when we find out what actually is planned. And as for running, obviously we run 3 regulatory schemes for the government. We obviously are spoken to way in advance of these sort of introductions. So, as you say, wait and see. So thank you very much, Sean, for popping in and giving up your valuable time. And of course, Paul, thank you as always. Thank you for listening, and if you're watching on YouTube, thank you for watching. This podcast will put out on Total Landlord Knowledge Centre, and we'll also be putting it up on Landlord Zone, so that you can keep up with private rented sector development and news. But for now, thanks very much, guys. Look forward to speaking and hearing from you in the next few weeks.